Images of what Mark Rawlings had seen tonight were swirling in his mind, the horrors of some nightmare still lingering in his head upon awakening. It had been Rob Garton's idea. For as long as Rawlings had known Garton, the man had been obsessed with conspiracies and attempting to uncover secret plots going on behind political or corporate scenery. Rawlings had always put it down to Garton having too much time on his hands. His job at the factory had gone, and his wife had cleared off and left him taking the two boys with her in the process. No wonder he had to fill up his days with something. Just recently he had become interested in a factory which had seen a takeover some time ago. Garton had started whispering to his close friends about what was going on there. He had suspected everything from drug dealing to the importing of dangerous aliens planning to take over the city. "You ought to find another job," Rawlings had advised, concern on his lean features. "You'll drive yourself up the wall." But Garton was not to be deterred. He started formulating plans, reckoned one of his friends could overcome security codes at the factory, and they could all let themselves in there. Only a few hours ago Rawlings had sat in a cafe talking to Garton across a table whose checkered cover bore the empty plates of a recently finished meal. "Tonight?" Rawlings could see enthusiasm on those round features, that balding scalp glowing in the harsh light. Why wait? As far as Garton was concerned, any delay would mean more death. "We can't just walk in there." Rawlings glanced furtively about, ensured nobody was taking an unhealthy interest in their conversation. Nearby, a hugely overweight man was tucking into his fifth helping of sago pudding, his guts spilling out over his trousers. In the other direction, two women, plastered in makeup, were having an argument about some man called Jim. What if it's all perfectly innocent? It's not innocent. Garton was prepared to put good money on that. Not very much, obviously, given that his darling ex-wife was squeezing him for every last gratin he had. I know people who've seen the comings and goings there. In the early hours of the morning they had witnessed all kinds of things they could barely speak of. Believe you me, there's nothing even remotely innocent about that place. Rawlings had meant to ask his friend what his contacts were doing in the factory grounds at such a time of the morning, but Garton had been keen to start his preparations. He moved from the cafe like a crime boss planning a raid, murmured to Rawlings not to breathe a word of his intentions to anybody. "Just you bring your camera." Garton knew the other man had wanted to take a photography course back in their younger days. He was still a dab hand with a camera. "We're going to need proof to show to the authorities." Proof of what? Rawlings wanted to know, but the other was gone. The day had been a long one. Rawlings was back at the garage that afternoon, but he could barely concentrate on his work as Garton's words echoed in his head. Slowly but surely evening drew on, a dark blanket ascending over the endless jungles of concrete, glass and steel which had been Rawlings' home since birth. Having returned to his poky little flat in the box-shaped complex across the wide highway, Rawlings dared hope for a while his friend had gone off his wild scheme. But there was the jangle of the doorbell late that night. Rawlings' blood was turning cold as he answered the door, already knowing exactly who was out there. Sure enough, it was Garton. He was accompanied by a tall, thin, dour-looking man. He was a professional computer programmer called Skase, Garton explained, and there was no electronically sealed door closed to him. The trio made their way down the flights of stairs and across the expanse of concrete outside the flats to where Garton's small, black, battered-looking electro car was resting on its hover pad. In no time they were making their way along the wide highway, rows and rows of similar cars all whooshing along, their hover pads carrying them just above the ground. The city was, of course, lit up against the dark night like an electrical store window. Rawlings felt his stomach tying itself into a tighter knot all the way across the metropolis. He couldn't let the others see he was afraid. At school he had always been the coward, one who seemed constantly terrified of everything. Once the gang had gone scrumping for apples. He had been petrified every moment, had images of himself being named and shamed in front of the school. "We're here," Garton murmured over his shoulder from the front seat. The car ground to a halt. Somewhere up ahead there were bright lights. The three men moved from the car, kept to dark corners as they slunk between the two towering walls of a horseshoe-shaped building. Grey steel was glowing in the wall-mounted lights high above. Rawlings couldn't help thinking the security system had already detected him. Any moment now he was going to be surrounded by blank-faced men in body armour, pointing guns at him. There were faces on the wall, twisted features sculpted from iron, and staring down through steel eyes. A flickering light almost gave the impression of movement. Rawlings stared up at them, saw hard eyes, ragged teeth, hooked noses, a gang of wicked witches, all waiting for any unwary traveller to enter their cottage. Miraculously, Skase managed to switch off the security grid by means of a small handheld control unit. Within a few minutes the three men were making their way along a corridor. Dark steel surrounded them. As Rawlings moved onwards, he felt thousands of eyes staring at him from all around. Skase made his way through another door by means of his handheld gadget, and the trio descended a long, winding flight of stairs. Rawlings was put in mind of some old dark house. Yes, and they were making their way into the cellar, where it didn't even bear thinking about what they might disturb. What happened next was still a mystery to Rawlings, a swirling collection of jumbled images. The photographs he took in the darkness by means of a flashlight on his camera had chilled and sickened him to his very soul. But then there was a noise in the darkness. Before anyone could react, Garton was pulled away. Rawlings caught images of iron fangs and spurts of crimson as his friend's screams echoed through the underground hall. Then Skase was taken, grunted and struggled as what felt like a row of icicles descended into his throat, caused an eruption of hot fluid. Rawlings had turned and run, stumbled up the stairs, choked back sobs as he disappeared into the night, did not stop running until he was far away from the factory. Maria Rawlings was deeply concerned for her husband. He had been worried lately due to the job situation in the city. It seemed more and more people were being laid off every day as automation took over. He had said only recently his friend Garton thought he had a job for life until the factory in Marlow Street was automated. But last night Rawlings had come home in a terrible state. It had been late at night when he stumbled into the bathroom. Maria had been awoken by his noise. He was in there for a long time. When he did come to bed he was shaking. He made some excuse about muggers. Maria suggested they go to the police first thing in the morning, but Rawlings had hastily fumbled for excuses. "Never saw their faces," he blurted out too quickly. "Anyway, they didn't really get anything." "Yes, stick with this story. Try to believe it yourself. Blot out reality and maybe the carnage at the factory would not have happened." "I think they must have been frightened off by someone." Maria's small, round-featured face fell in dismay. "It's disgusting," she reasoned. "The crime that goes on." "All right," Rawlings cried, in no mood for a discussion. He had awoken several times that night, convinced somebody or something was outside the window. That morning he was constantly glancing through the window of the homely little living room, still suspected he might have been followed from the factory. He had to go to work, he told himself. He sat at home, he would go up the wall from worry. Maria was in the kitchen preparing her husband's tea when she heard the flat front door opening and closing. Hoping Rawlings had recovered, she removed the chicken roast from the oven and made her way into the sitting room. There was no sign of her husband. Instead there was a stranger seated on the sofa. Her small athletic frame was clad in a dark leather trouser suit and matching boots. Her hands dressed in similarly covered leather gloves. A mop of fluffy hair, dyed the colour of a holiday brochure sky, sat above a pale face boasting angular features. Approaching, bewildered, Maria craned over the unearthly figure. She saw her own cherubic features, reflected in the black visor-like strip which seemed to be in front of the stranger's eyes. At first Maria thought it was sunglasses, but closer inspection revealed the visor-like structure was fixed into the stranger's pasty features. The guest broke into a grin. Maria couldn't help but think the deep, red stains on those teeth with dried blood. She was ashamed of herself for even contemplating such a thing, but she couldn't help but be unnerved by the visitor. The stranger seemed like a predatory animal, constantly alert, a coiled spring. The human-like creature held its head back, scenting the air like a dog.
Warm flesh!
That voice was a feral growl.
The enticing scent of warm flesh!
Maria's throat was a dry desert. Finally she managed to offer the roast dinner to the stranger.
No vegetables!
Sidebar held up her hand, removed her glove. Beneath it was cold, black metal. Suddenly the fingers began reshaping themselves. In an instant, Sidebar's hand had become a large, serrated metal knife.
Shall I carve?
Then her voice became that of a little girl.
A devoted, caring wife is so lovely.
She scented the air once again.
And your flesh has stood the test of time better than most people of your age.
Maria staggered, almost dropped the dinner, placed it on the nearby modest coffee table. Sidebar only regarded the roast chicken with a crimson grin, held her knife hand aloft as though in salute.
Flesh forever!
That growl seemed to echo around the living room as though it were a beast of the night, surrounding the terrified housewife with 1,000 tentacles. Sidebar turned back to the cowering woman, her voice once again becoming childlike.
Your husband has something of mine.
She began picking at the sofa with her knife hand like a nervous little girl.
I want it back, please.
That grin broadened again.
I only lent it him.
Suddenly Maria felt a longing for her Rob. Surely he would come home from work at any moment. Then again she wondered whether she wanted him coming home to this. As though tired of playing games, Sidebar hissed a command into a wrist-mounted communicator. A huge figure in a dark suit was instantly in the room, his face invisible behind the shining black metal of her helmet.
We can do this the easy way.
Sidebar growled at the terrified woman.
Your husband broke into my property and took illegal photographs.
She paused as though allowing that time to sink in, seemingly oblivious to Maria's fear.
You give them to me, and we will be out of here, never to darken your door again.
Finally Maria managed to speak, outrage boiling inside her at this intrusion. I don't know what you're talking about! She was unnerved at her own bravery. Just get out of here and leave me alone! Sidebar gestured for her employee to search the flat. It was then that the door opened. Maria screamed for her Rob not to come into the house. He realised instantly what was happening, darted away as the huge, suited figure turned on him. Sidebar only squealed in delight as she and her guard pursued Rawlings out into the passage lined with doors to the other flats. Rawlings descended a flight of stairs, images of Maria in his head, guilt eating away at him as he realised he couldn't leave her. But he knew he must escape, had to give those photographs to somebody in authority. The sound of Sidebar's knife hand raking through wallpaper, scratching brickwork, was enough to keep him going.
We're gonna get you,
she crowed in that childlike voice. Rawlings was in his electro car and away into the network of city streets within a matter of moments. Sidebar and her guard lost him, were unable to find him. They nevertheless turned his house upside down, looking for the photographs.
Where are they?
Sidebar snarled. Maria was now seated on the sofa, helpless, surrounded by the wreckage of her home. She could only stammer that she had no idea what the other was talking about.
I'll find them.
Sidebar's cold knife hand was pressed against Maria's face. She dared not move lest that ragged blade should cut into her. Sidebar was menacingly calm. Maria once again saw her own features, streaked with tears, and that expressionless visor eye.
And I'll find your husband.
The city was a big place, but he couldn't stay hidden forever.